Hello, I'm Barry Hutchison and I'm delighted to be part of the Scottish Silly Squad supporting Scottish libraries and the Summer Reading Challenge this summer. If you don't know me, I am the author of over 100 children's books. I have written this book, and this book, this book, these books, these books, these books, this book, this book, this book, this book, and 90 something more. I'm going to talk a bit about this series today, I think. This is my Invisible Fiends series. These were actually the first books that I ever had published. And so I'm going to talk about them because I haven't spoken about them in ages. Then I'm going to set you a Scottish Silly Squad task for you to complete in your own time and then share online. So without any further ado, let's get started. The Invisible Fiends books tell the story of a boy called Kyle Alexander. When Kyle was 3 or 4, he had an imaginary friend called Mr. Mumbles. Mr. Mumbles was a nice little guy. He couldn't talk properly. He just mumbled all the time, hence the name. But he made up for it by doing like juggling and funny dances and magic tricks and stuff. But like all children, Kyle started to grow up. By the time he was 6 or 7, he had stopped seeing Mr. Mumbles. By the time he was 10, he'd forgotten that Mr. Mumbles had ever even existed. But Mr. Mumbles didn't forget about him. And on one dark and stormy Christmas day when Kyle's 12, he's all alone in his house. His mum has gone to take his gran home. He's lying on top of his bed, listening to the wind and rain battering outside his window, when all of a sudden he hears a scratching sound coming from the ceiling above him. And as he lies there in the dark listening, it gets louder and it gets louder, and suddenly all the lights in his house go out and he's plunged into darkness. So understandably he starts to become a little bit concerned. He becomes even more concerned, however, when suddenly he hears on his bedroom window. Somebody's knocking on the window trying to get in. So he jumps out of bed, grabs his baseball bat from under the bed, runs down the stairs, but as he gets to the bottom of the stairs, he hears somebody starts knocking on his living room door, the front door of the house, locks the front door, runs through to the back door. As he gets to the back door, boom, 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 somebody starts hammering on it as well, and Kyle realises that he is all alone in the house, trapped by whoever is knocking outside. So he runs to the phone, grabs the phone, dials 999 to call the police, but instead of hearing a ringing tone, he hears a mumbled voice telling him that he is about to die. Then all of a sudden the window explodes, and this man in a big hat and a big coat comes climbing in, and it is Mr. Mumbles who has returned. Before he went away, like I say, Mr. Mumbles was a nice little guy. When he comes back, he is a monster. He's 6.5 foot tall. Instead of just mumbling, his mouth has been sewn shut, and he immediately attacks Kyle. And Kyle only escapes when he's been strangled in his front step, and a girl called Amina turns up, grabs the baseball bat, and knocks Mr. Mumbles' head almost clean off his shoulders. So they run away together with Mr. Mumbles pursuing him. There are 6 books in the series. Each book features a different imaginary friend. So book 2, for example, is called Raggy Maggie. Raggy Maggie is actually this character here. She's a porcelain doll, which I always found a bit creepy. And Caddy is the girl that carries it around. I'll explain who Caddy really is in a minute. And the third book in the series is called The Crowmaster, and the Crowmaster is this scarecrow who has control of an army of birds that you can send after you to pick your eyes out and eat you alive. And there are 3 other books which I don't have in my office, so I can't show you. But you just have to take my word for it that they do actually exist. The idea for the series actually came about from something that happened to me when I was in primary 2 I think. I was about 6 years old, so I think about primary 2. And it remains, I would say, the single most terrifying moment of my entire life. When I was 6, a new boy came to my school and his name was Derek. I don't remember much about Derek. I don't remember where Derek came from. I don't remember where Derek went. All I remember is this one terrifying incident. Derek was coming to my house after school one day, but before we got to my house we decided we were stopping at Derek's house to pick up a toy or a game or a book or whatever it may be, I can't remember what. We got to Derek's house and there was nobody home, or so I thought. Derek ran up the stairs to get whatever it was we had come to get, and I stood at the bottom of the stairs with my school bag on, waiting for him to come back down. And after a few seconds I heard this thump, 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 and Derek came racing down the stairs, and he jumped the last few steps and he said, "Quick, come and see this!" And he ran back up the stairs again. So I ran after him, and I found him standing on outside this door at the top of the stairs. And he grabbed me by the straps of my school bag and said, "Quick, come in here!" And he pulled me into the bathroom. And then he said, "Look at that!" And he pointed into the toilet. And in the toilet was the biggest poo I had ever seen in my entire life. And because we were 6, it was the best thing we'd ever seen in our entire life. And we both stood there for about 10 minutes just staring at it in amazement, unable to believe the size of this giant poo that had been left in the toilet. And after about 10 minutes of staring, I said, "Oh, who did that?" And Derek said, "That was Jojo." And I said, "Alright, who's Jojo then?" And Derek looked past me and he said, "That's him there." So I went, "Where?" And he leaned past me again and he said, "He's there. He's right there. He's standing right behind you." So I went, and I said, "There's no one there, Derek." And Derek's face went really serious and he said, "Aye, there is. Jojo, the big blue guy with the knife." At which point I almost did a giant poo of my own. And I stood there frozen to the spot in fear, thinking there was a massive blue guy standing behind me carrying a knife who I couldn't see for some reason. And eventually my legs kicked into life and I ran down the stairs and out the front door, and I never played with Derek again after that, as far as I can remember. But it turned out that Jojo was Derek's imaginary friend, and Derek believed that Jojo would follow him around at all times, and if anyone tried to mess with Derek, Jojo would exact some terrible revenge. So that idea of that scary imaginary friend standing behind me, many years later, led me to create the Invisible Fiends horror series. Interesting little side note to that story, by the way. A few years ago, I was at my school reunion. And all the kids I've been in school with, they were there, all grown up. Some of the teachers, they were there. And I got talking to them all. I said, "Here, do you remember that guy Derek that came to our school in primary 2? Nobody else remembers Derek. Which makes me think that maybe Derek was actually my imaginary friend, and that my imaginary friend had his own imaginary friend that was a giant blue guy who carried a knife and did massive poos in his toilet." But somebody asked me recently, someone said, "Do you think Derek was real or do you think he was imaginary?" And I honestly don't know, but I really hope he was real, because if he wasn't real, it means that when I was 6, I walked into a complete stranger's house by myself, spent 10 minutes just laughing at their toilet, and then ran away crying, which makes me sound like a maniac. But yeah, that feeling of Jojo standing behind me led me to create the Invisible Fiends series. All the villains in the series are based on things that scared me in one way or another when I was younger. So, for example, Mr. Mumbles has his mouth sewn shut. When I was about 4, I was on, you know these rides you get outside the supermarket? You put in like 50p and woohoo! It could be a horse or a little car or a plane or whatever. Woo! I was on one of them and I went, "Look at me, Mum!" And then I fell off. and when I fell off I cracked my head on the ride behind me. My head exploded. Not literally exploded, but my skull cracked open, blood everywhere. I had to be taken into hospital. I got stitches. In hospital they shaved half my head off. No, half my hair off, not half my head off. That would have been awful. They shaved half my hair off, so I was half bald. And they put stitches in. And I remember coming home, looking at myself in the mirror, and the stitches were in, the skin was all puckered up really tight, and it was horrible. I couldn't look at it. I was so freaked out that I couldn't look at myself for months afterwards. I was convinced, even after the stitches were gone, that it was all still going to be there. Even when the hair had grown back, I was convinced that I was going to look and see this horrible sight. So it really kind of put me off that thing of seeing people with stitches. I always get a bit, oh, that looks awful. So people who've got stitches in their head or their face has always kind of disturbed me a little bit. So I thought, right, you're writing a horror story, you're writing something scary, you wanted to scare yourself as well. Because things that scare you will almost certainly scare other people too. Because we're all quite similar human beings, really. So I thought, what would scare me? And I thought, a 6.5 foot tall man with his mouth tightly sewn shut, trying to kill me with an axe. Would that be a scary thing to happen in real life? Yes, it probably would. And that's where Mr. Mumbles came from. The second book in the series, as I mentioned, is called Raggy Maggie. Raggy Maggie is the doll. My gran used to collect porcelain dolls. She had over 200 porcelain dolls in her house. They're all lined up to greet you. You walked in the front door, there was like a gang of them looking at you. And they're all really old, so they were kind of faces faded, because I painted on faces and they'd all faded or they were cracked. You walk in, she had shelves going up the stairs, and they were balanced on the shelves, staring at you there. She had one on top of the toilet, so that was watching you when you were having a pee, which is really off-putting when you're 7. She also had one on the bedside table, next to the bed that I would sleep in when we went to visit her, angled so it was staring down at the pillow. So the first thing you saw when you opened your eyes in the morning was this doll leaning over you, staring down. So I'd always wake up, so every night before I went to sleep I would turn it round so it was facing the other way. And every night after I'd gone to sleep, she would tiptoe in and she would turn it back. And I became convinced that this doll was moving by itself during the night. So convinced, in fact, that one day I took it into our back garden and I smashed its head in with a brick. And it turned out it was 90 years old and worth £3,500. So she really wasn't happy. So that's Raggy Maggie. Caddy, the girl who carries Raggy Maggie around, Raggy Maggie whispers to her and tells her to hurt people. Caddy's actually based on my sister's imaginary friend from when she was young. My sister is 8 years older than me. And when I was about 12, my mum told me the story of my sister's imaginary friend, Caddy. Before I was born, my sister was young. She used to believe that this little girl called Caddy lived in the this air vent in our house. It's like part of the heating system. There's an air vent there, and she thought Caddy was in there tucked up so she could fit. All her bones had been broken, so she was all collapsed in on herself, all folded up, with her face pressed up against the metal bars, staring out through the gap. And I thought this sounds like the single most horrifying thing that's ever been imagined in history. But my sister thought she was very nice, despite the fact that she was clearly monstrous. And my sister used to feed Caddy every day. So she would get thin pieces of food and just slide them through the gaps in the air vent, like bits of ham, bits of cheese, Twix that she managed to hammer through one bit at a time. Once she apparently spooned an entire jar of strawberry jam into the heating system. Quite why she thought Caddy wanted a whole jar of jam in one go, I'm not entirely sure, but that's what she did. So every few days my mum and dad would have to unscrew this air vent and pull manky old bits of ham out and stuff. But that idea of this little girl in there all folded up, staring, whispering, I thought was quite scary. So I thought, I'm going to use her. I didn't want to leave her trapped in the air vent or leave her with all her bones broken, because a horror villain who just lies on the floor going, call me an ambulance, wouldn't be particularly scary, I don't think. So she's up and about, and she has the doll telling her to hurt people. So combined 2 of my childhood fears there. The third book in the series, The Crowmaster, like I say, is about a scarecrow with an army of flesh-eating birds. And the idea for this book came from something that happened to me when I was about 8. So we had a pet budgie called Joey. I quite like Joey. In as much as you can like a budgie, they don't really do an awful lot. But every day we'd open Joey's cage, he would fly around the living room 6 or 7 times. He'd fly back into his cage, he'd have his exercise, that'd be him happy for the rest of the day. One day though, Joey decided to do things a little bit differently. He opened Joey's cage, he flew 6 or 7 times around the living room, but instead of flying back into his cage, he flew straight towards my head. He landed on my head, got his claws tangled in my hair, and ended up hanging upside down, flapping about in a mad panic. And he decided in his little budgie brain that the best way of getting free from this predicament was by clawing my face off. So he began frantically pecking and clawing at me. So I started screaming and running around the living room, just like Joey used to do, with this bird flapping frantically in my hair and blood pouring down my face. And I'll be honest, I wasn't quite so keen on Joey after that. And he kind of put me off birds in general. I've been a bit wary of birds ever since. So yeah, so that's the Invisible Fiends series. The reason I'm so happy to be doing events for the library service is that it's really libraries that turned me into an author. One library in particular, the library that was attached to my school up here in Fort William, in a village called Cool, just outside Fort William. That's C-A-O-L, not C-O-O-L, but it still said Cool. So we were going there I think primary 4, I want to say, primary 5 maybe, thereabouts. And I actually didn't read many books at that point. I love reading books now, I love reading books through most of my childhood, but until that point I was more into reading comics. I read Batman and Spider-Man and the Hulk and the Beano. I love the Beano. I actually write for the Beano now, which is an amazing, joyous thing for me to do. But I read comics a lot. And we went to the library one day, and the teacher got us to talk about what kind of books we liked. And the teacher knew at that stage that I didn't really like reading books. And she didn't like comics. And she made me go last. And she kind of says, "Now Barry, you tell Mrs McAllister, the librarian, what you like to read." And I think she expected Mrs McAllister to be horrified that I said I like reading comics. However, Mrs McAllister was very cool, C-O-O-L, not C-A-O-L, and she says, "Hang on a minute," and she went through the back into our little storeroom bit, and she came back through with this massive stash of comics, and she went, boom, there we go, read those. And it was like, oh, it's amazing. And every day I would come back into the library and I'd work my way through these comics. I'd be working my way through this massive bundle. And then she would start going, "Oh, that's interesting, you're reading that comic, which has kind of got science fiction stuff in it. Here's a funny book about aliens. Have a read of that." And I would go home and take that book home, and I'd read that book and I'd go, "Oh, that's really good." Bring it back, or she'll go, "Okay, you're reading this book about this comic about superheroes. Here's a book about superheroes. Read that." And she eventually got me to read books as well as comics. And then I started going in and asking specifically for books. So I would say, "I want a book about monsters." And she would go, "Haha, I have a book about monsters." And she would go and fetch that book about monsters from the shelf. And she would go, "There you go, book about monsters." And I would take it home and I would read it. And I did that with loads of different subjects. And then for a while I became obsessed with ninjas. They're dressed in black, throwing stars, nunchucks, all that stuff. And I became obsessed with them. And I went to the library and said, "I need a book about ninjas, immediately." And she says, "I don't have any books about ninjas." And I was devastated. I thought, the library has failed me. It has no books on ninjas. This is all a sham. And then Mrs McAllister said something which literally changed the entire path of my life. She said, "Wait there a minute," and she went through the back. And she emerged about 30 seconds later, and she handed me a notebook and she handed me a pencil and said, "Write a story about ninjas." So I went away, and over the course of the next week I wrote a terrible story about ninjas. Really one of the worst stories ever committed to paper. And I brought it back in, and she read it. It was actually quite short, but she read it, and then she wrote the name of the story and my name on the side of the notebook, and she put it on the shelf in the library. And you know, sometimes you see in films and cartoons, there's like the clouds all part, whoa, and there's a big beam of light comes down, ah. That's what it felt like in that moment, seeing my name on the book, on the side of that book, on the shelf in the library. And I knew at that moment that that's what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to keep writing stories, and I wanted them to be in libraries all over the country, all over the world, possibly the universe. I don't know how far out they go, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And it came from Mrs. McAllister in that library on that one day. So thanks to Mrs. McAllister, I have now written over 100 books for children. I have now written hundreds of comics. I've written for the TV. I've written books for adults. All kinds of stuff, really. And it all started in that library on that day. And I think that, if nothing else, shows the importance and the power of libraries to change lives. So please do support your library. Make sure you go in and use it to the best of your ability, because maybe it will change your life too. The reason I wanted to write horror is that growing up I was terrified of pretty much everything in the world. I was scared of dogs, I was scared of cats, I was scared of birds, as I mentioned. I was scared of goldfish for reasons I won't go into. I was scared of being in high places, being in wide open spaces, being in confined spaces. If my friends came to the door and said, "Do you want to come out and play?" I'd say, "I'd love to go out and play, but if I go outside, I'll probably die." So I would stay inside instead and write stories. There were two things though, more than anything else, that used to really terrify me and keep me awake worrying night after night after night. Death and squirrels. And the reason I was scared of squirrels is when I was about 7, I was up in Aberdeen with my mum and dad visiting my granny, who I'd already mentioned. We were going through one of the big parks in Aberdeen. I was running ahead all excited. My mum and dad were somewhere behind, and then suddenly in the middle of this path I saw a dead squirrel. And it was like, it was properly dead, if you know what I mean. It had a leg missing, his guts had come out through his eyes. It was in a terrible mess. And my first thought was, oh, that's a shame. Poor squirrel all mashed up like that, that is terrible. And my second thought, because like most authors that have a very overactive imagination, my second thought, as I was looking down at this poor dead squirrel, was, what if it comes back to life and jumps up and grabs me by the face and starts trying to claw my eyes out and like rubbing its guts in my mouth? And I imagined this zombie squirrel so vividly that my heart started beating really fast, and I started finding it hard to breathe, and I actually gave myself a panic attack thinking about a dead squirrel chewing my face off. I was only 7, but now 35 years later, am I that old? Yes, 35 years later, if I see a squirrel my heart starts beating really fast, I start finding it hard to breathe, and I've given myself a genuine phobia of squirrels. And we're all scared of something. That's the thing that makes horror really interesting, is everybody is scared of something, even if people don't like to admit it, because sometimes we use fear as an insult. We say, you're a chicken, you're a coward, whatever. But fear is really important. Fear is one of the most important emotions we have as human beings. Fear is what stops us like putting our hands into fire or throwing ourselves in front of trains or whatever it might be. Fear is a survival mechanism. Millions of years ago, without fear, we would have been stepping out of our caves, spotting a saber-toothed tiger and just booting it up the bum. But we didn't, because we were scared it would turn round and bite our head off. And it probably would have. So thanks to fear, the human race still exists today. So fear is very important. And like I said, we all have things that we are scared of. Sometimes those are sensible things. Sometimes those are unusual things. For example, I was in a school in Glasgow several years ago now, and I said, has anyone got anything you're really scared of? I asked the audience. And a few people said, yeah, I'm scared of big dogs, I'm scared of lions, whatever it might be. Spiders, snakes, they're very common. And then this boy down the front said, me! And I said, yep. And he said, toast! And he was terrified of toast. And I said, alright, that's fair enough. What about bread? Are you scared of bread? He said, no, that'd be weird. Not quite sure what the difference is, but yeah, so we're all scared of something whether we like to admit it or not. And I have used all those fears to create the monsters in the Invisible Fiends series. I also used them to create some monsters in my Benjamin Blank series. Let me find... I've broken everything. We'll edit that bit out, pretend it didn't happen. So the shark-headed bear thing, for example, is a mashup of things that I thought were scary. I've been scared of sharks ever since my sister made me watch the film Jaws the night before I did swimming lessons with my school, and I humiliated myself by becoming convinced there was a shark in the pool, jumping out of the water and running screaming to the changing rooms. So I did this as a mashup monster. I said, right, shark's scary. Take the head of a shark, because that's the scary part. No one's scared of the tail of a shark. We're scared of the head and the fin, so the fin's on the back there. And then body of a bear. Bear's huge, terrifying. Tail of a bunny, because bunnies are obviously scary as well. But yeah, so I took a few different things and I mashed them together and I created my own scary thing. And that's what I want you guys to do for your Scottish Silly Squad challenge that I am setting you right here and now. I want you to mash up your own scary monster. Think of things you are scared of. So maybe it's got the head of a spider, maybe it's got the body of a snake, maybe it's got the tail of... What's got a tail? Snake's already got a tail, isn't it? Forget the snake. It's got the head of a spider. No, forget that, because spider's head's rubbish. Legs of a spider. Legs of a spider are terrifying. Head of a clown. Tail of a rat. Big thingy rat thing. So you can just pick up different... It doesn't have to be animals either. It could be anything you can think of. It could have a TV for a head that just shows really boring television programmes at all times. And you are forced to... It follows you around and forces you to watch it. It could have anything. So I was at the Edinburgh Book Festival a few years ago and I asked people what's the scariest thing you can think of, and someone suggested Donald Trump. So our mashup monster then was a Trump-headed snake thing, the head of Donald Trump and the body of a snake. And then you can go crazy, you can give it arms, and it could have an arm, it's a robot arm, it could have a monster arm, you could give it a hat that shoots lasers, you could give it glasses that let it see through time, or something like that. Probably not exactly that, but something like that. I want you guys to draw a picture to mash up your scariest monsters, all your fears that you have in your head, everything you're scared of, mash it together. Give me a giant dog that's got a clown's nose. Whatever, you know what you're scared of, I don't. Pick the things you're scared of, mash it together, and then I want you to share it, or your parents, to share it on social media with the hashtag Scottish Silly Squad. It's probably going to appear down there somewhere. I don't know, maybe it won't. We'll add that in. Little Scottish Silly Squad, hashtag that, and share it for us all to see. And I cannot wait to see what you guys come up with. To close this video, I have been asked to give you a message. However, I have forgotten what that message is. So what I thought I would do is I'll just move my mouth so it looks like I'm talking, and then I will dub that message on in post-production, like they do in that Hollywood. Okay, so that's it. Bye for me. Here comes the important message I have to give you.
Don't forget to sign up to the challenge. Details of how to do so follow. And remember, your library building may be closed, but there are lots of Silly Squad librarians on hand to support you through this year's challenge, so get in touch with your local library. Why am I still talking? And I've stopped.
Got that?